Well, hello, hello. Welcome back. Are you ready to start chapter 18 of In the Company of Witches? Here we go. I hope you're sitting down with your beverage and your blankie. Chapter 18. Mary Graves had been wanting to talk to me for months. That didn't make any sense. It hadn't even been a week since Constance's passed. You probably don't remember me, she went on, twisting a handkerchief in her hand, but we've met before, at the bookstore. The woman before me had the same color of eyes as her siblings, but everything else about her seemed softer, from the shape of her features to the rounded planes of her face. "You're Mary Coleman," I stammered. "I wanted to say I'm very sorry for the loss of your sister." "Please, I think it's best we don't talk about Constance." "All right." I tucked my blowing hair behind my ears. "Given everything that's happened, I wouldn't normally come to you," she said, looking down at her hands. "My daughter would be furious if she knew." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Did Theo happen to mention to you my husband passed recently?" I was hit with a rush of sympathy and understanding. "I've heard you come to people sometimes with their loved ones when their loved ones have passed, that you bring messages." A single tear spilled onto her cheek. "I know it's been a while, but I was hoping you might have a message for me." I didn't have the time to answer before she went on. "His name was Grant Coleman. He passed 4 months ago. He wore glasses. His hair was a little thin, but he was very handsome. You might have seen him at the hardware store. He loved to fix things. Or you might have seen him sitting in the town gazebo. That was one of his favorite spots. If he was going to haunt anywhere, I think it would be there." "Mrs. Coleman, Mary," she looked up at me, so much hope in her eyes. "Would you like to sit down?" I asked, leading her gaze over to the bench. "The wind's dropping a little. I think we can have a proper chat. I'd love to hear all about Grant." She gave me a grateful smile once we were settled. Mary dabbed the tear from her face and said quietly, "You don't have a message, do you?" "I'm sorry, I don't. I'm afraid I haven't been able to receive any messages for quite some time now." "You don't have to explain," she said, giving my hand a squeeze. "Theo told me what happened. We're in the same boat, aren't we?" I smiled weakly. "Not the happiest of clubs. I haven't quite figured out how to move on without Grant. I thought a message from him might help, even though I'm not entirely sure I believe in what you do." She looked at me apologetically. "It's okay. I understand." "Well, my daughter thinks I've been spending too much time at the graveyard." She looked at the direction of the gates. "I usually visit once in the morning and once at night. I like to sit with him, keep his sight clean, let people know he was loved, is loved." "That's lovely." I took a breath. "I haven't been able to go." Mary leaned in toward me, trying to catch my gaze. "You haven't?" I shook my head. She sighed and patted my hand. "If you'd like, I can check on him, make sure everything's tidy." My eyes prickled. "That's very sweet of you. Thank you." "Think nothing of it," she said quickly. "You know, I'd always hoped I'd go before Grant, but it wasn't meant to work out that way. Nothing seems to be working out the way it should. Not for any of us." She looked over to the B&B. "We should talk about the case. But I want you to know I'm certain your aunt isn't responsible for what happened to Constance. Nora's a good person. She's always been kind to me." I frowned. I could have sworn Nora had said she didn't know anyone in Constance's family. I waited, hoping she'd elaborate, but Mary clearly had other things on her mind. "Do you think Constance is at peace?" The question shocked me a little. I wasn't sure how to answer it. I had never met a ghost who had been murdered before, and given the way Constance had been banging on the closet, I wouldn't say she was completely at peace. But I didn't want to upset Mary with the speculations. So I thought it best to tell her only what I knew for sure. In my experience, spirits are very peaceful on the other side. All the everyday concerns seem to lose importance. The only thing that matters is the love. Mary nodded and looked down again at her handkerchief. That's so nice to hear. I'd like to think my family could have that. My father, my siblings. It would be nice if we could find peace on the other side. Mary, I apologize for what I'm about to ask, but Nora is in trouble, and I know your family has been fractured for a long time. Do you think one of your brothers could have had something to do with Constance's death? She flinched, then quickly shook her head. I want to help you and your aunt. I really do, she said in a quiet voice. There was something in her eye that told me she meant it, but it was also plain something was holding her back. What are what you're asking? She began, picking at the cloth in her hand. After all we've been through, my family needs to heal. I have to think of them first. You do know something. I squeezed her hand to still it. Mary, please, you have to tell me. Mom, what are you doing? Both Mary and I jumped at the voice of the dark-haired woman striding towards us. I didn't recognize her, but this was obviously Liz Coleman. She had hard, wiry she had a hard, wiry look about her, but admittedly that impression was colored by the anger drawn across her face. Actually, I would say it was something more than anger. The woman coming towards us was furious. I've been looking for you everywhere, and this is where I find you, talking to her? Liz shot a hand in my direction. What were you thinking? Mary stammered something I couldn't hear as her daughter pulled her to her feet. Her aunt killed your sister. I jumped up. Leaves suddenly swirled around us on the sidewalk. That's a lie. You leave my mother alone. Liz raised her finger to my face. I'm not afraid of you or your parlor tricks. She looked down at our feet. I'm sorry? Don't play dumb. I know you and your aunts aren't right. Come on, Mom. Mary mouthed the words, I'm sorry, as her daughter dragged her away. I tried to shake off the lingering emotion from my encounter with Mary Coleman and her daughter on my walk to the library, but that was easier said than done. Now that I had met Liz, I was even more concerned about the upcoming town hall and what it might mean for my family. I was also starting to worry going to the library was a waste of my time. The most I could hope to find was a picture of Constance in the Evanfall Gazette. It was hard to imagine how that might help, and yet, despite my misgivings, I still felt like it was something I needed to do. I hurried up the wide concrete steps of the library. It was a lovely, deep red brick building, not large by any stretch of imagination, but it had been built around the same time as the B&B, and the architecture, which included some pretty impressive stained glass windows, gave it a slightly Gothic look. The enormous gnarled oak tree on the front lawn didn't hurt either. All was silent when I walked in, just the way I liked it. Not that the Evanfall Library wasn't popular. If I had to come a if I had come a little later in the morning, I knew the place would be packed with kids, which was wonderful in its own right. But there was something a bit magical about the silence of a room filled with books. You could almost feel the stories reaching out to you with romance and adventure. I smiled at the thought. I was getting carried away, but even if I was, I'd never reach the heights of carried awayness our town librarian, Christina, could manage when it came to the love of books. I walked through the foyer, eyeing the walls decorated with for Halloween with colored-in pictures of black cats, jack-o'-lanterns, and witches with warts on their noses. Rude. I then turned the corner and headed for Christina, perched on the stool behind the front desk. I couldn't help but notice she looked extra bookish today. She wore a white button-down shirt with a navy crewneck sweater over the top, a tweed skirt, and brown tights. Her legs were crossed both at the thigh and the ankle, turning them into pretzels, and she was chewing on the thumbnail of her left hand while her right held a book a few inches from her face. Her eyes were wide behind her oversized glasses. They were tracking the page in front of her at a furious rate. Christina! The librarian let out a shout and tossed the book in the air. She fumbled to catch it, but she only managed to bat it a few times before it hit the floor. Oh no! Then she was gone, disappeared behind the desk. I peered over the top. I found her on her knees, turning the fallen book over in her hand, apparently checking for injury. Oh, thank goodness you're okay. She rose to her feet, pushed her glasses back up her nose, and smiled at me. Bryn, it's so good to see you. Sorry about all that. I chuckled. It must be good. What's that? The book. It must be good. Oh, it is. But it's about a haunted house, and ghosts terrify me. Really? Oh, yes, she said, her face falling into a very earnest expression. Ever since I was little, my brother used to creep into my room after it was lights out with a sheet thrown over his head. I always knew it was him, but still, she shuddered. Even A Christmas Carol gives me the heebie-jeebies. I smiled. Then why are you reading it? She looked confused. I don't know. I guess it's good to be a little scared every now and then. Lets you know you're alive. She placed the book down with exceeding care onto the counter. So, what can I do for you? Are you looking for a recommendation? She snapped with her fingers. You were always a romantic reader. Before the words had left her mouth, her face crumpled. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I said that. What's wrong with me? No, Christina, don't do that, I said, reaching across the desk to give her hand a squeeze. You didn't say anything wrong. I hate the fact that people feel they have to watch every little thing they say around me. She bit her lip and nodded. Besides, I do need your help, and if you think what happened just now was awkward, wait until you hear what I came for. I explained everything. I explained everything I could to Christina. It was hard to put it into words why I wanted to see Constance back in her youth, doing what she loved, because I didn't fully understand myself. But when I finished, Christina nodded and said, Rosebud. I'm sorry? Citizen Kane, the movie. Have you ever seen it? No, I don't think I have. You'd remember it. I won't spoil the ending, but the idea behind it is that it's hard, almost impossible really, to ever fully know someone. One person's monster is another person's angel. That kind of thing. That's exactly it, I said. Constance had a reputation for being abrasive, but I know that wasn't always the case. Well, Christina said, coming around the desk and rubbing her hands together, let's see what we can dig up in the archives. I couldn't help but smile again. This was a woman who really loved her job. It took us some time to sort through the microfilm to find what we hoped would be the right year. We figured Constance would have been in her early 20s when she was performing, so we went with that. It then took a little longer to get the machine up and running with the film threaded. It would be great if we could transfer all of this to the computer, Christina said, but it's a big job. One day, maybe. It took about 20 minutes of scrolling before Christina shouted, There! She pointed at the glowing screen. HMS Pinafore. The picture included several people in costume on the set of the boat, including one woman out front in a white dress holding a parasol. I leaned forward to read the caption. Constance Graves as Josephine. Wow, she was a looker. I couldn't help but agree. Just then the phone rang. I'll be right back, Christina said, hurrying away. I nodded and turned back to the photo. There was something almost mesmerizing about it. So much life captured, frozen in time. And yet, not quite. The strangest sensation fell over me. It was like I could almost see the skirts of the women twirling, the furious goings on happening behind the scenes. I could hear something, too, sounds far off in the distance, singing, feet stamping out of time, gasp, laughter, applause. The heat of the floodlights warmed my Constance's face as I stepped forward and to the front of the stage, holding out one arm, then dipping it in a low curtsy, head bowing to the audience's praise. "Wait a minute," a voice said. I jolted and brought a hand to my heart. "Sorry," Christina laughed. "Although it's good to see I'm not the only one who can be transfixed." Wow, I was really in the moment. Like, really in the moment. I had never been a medium for ghosts before, but those sensations had felt like Constance's memories. If I had to guess, she was in the library with us, watching, hoping maybe I would figure out what it was she wanted me to know. I gave my head a shake. "What was it you were going to say?" "Just that I recognized someone in that photo," she said, pointing at a man dressed smartly as a sailor off to the side of the frame. "Who is that?" "My dad."